The theme tonight is education, sustainability, and in both directions, how education can bring sustainability and how sustainable education can help. So maybe we can talk first about how we see education or growth, human growth in general. Would you like to start?
Sure. So good evening, everybody. It is a pleasure to see new people, and equally important to see my kindreds here offering support and love. It's always easy to speak to youth, but when speaking to those in the age group, kind of there's a bit of a tension because I'm thinking, like, what am I going to be saying here? But maybe I think we initially was the metaphor of the hike yesterday as a starting point. So I was in the Helderberg hiking, and that aspect of education, I didn't think of it as education, but there was this awareness. It's a time where the vegetation is really coming into being. And so what struck me was this element of contraction and contraction and expansion in nature. And I think when we think of nature, most of the time we assume it's something out there, and we forget that we are part of it. And within us lies this expansion and contraction. And so I looked at the plants and I thought, wow, everything within this ecosystem has been encoded to be the best version of itself. And at times, we put so much pressure on ourselves to be anything other than ourselves. We encode it to be the best version of me. An orange can only be an orange. A protea can only be a protea. And this expansion, I noticed, happened as the seasons changed. These daisies started coming into being. And the daisy's purpose was to be the best version of a daisy. And then it opened up, and I noticed then bees coming and resting and suckling and drinking this nectar. And it got me thinking that in its expansive state, the flower does the best as being a flower, but the flower gets to a point where it says, I am here, I'm available, take from me. And nature is ever giving. And nature gives, it forms this collaborative relationship. So it collaborates with the bees who need that element to produce honey and to pollinate. And so I started asking myself, what is it about us? What is it in our educational systems that we can replicate and bring this into a state where we collaborate, where we bring out the best version of each learner, whereby we support the other to be the best version of themselves. And so that aspect of collaboration within that space, but also the contraction starts to happen. As the season changes, autumn will come through, winter will come in, and there's this contraction. Some may see it as death, but it's a purpose that has been fulfilled. And I think that was the thinking, what do we do to replicate this expansion and contraction? Yeah.
So I thought when we went there, it was interesting for me to connect with a lot of things that Montessori talks about. For example, she has a perspective on the world as a system. She talks about interdependencies in nature, in human society, and she calls it the cosmos. It's more than the universe. The universe is the idea of the things. The cosmos is all these things in a system. And so in the idea of that every form of life has a potential, today we know it's mostly in the DNA. So we are born with a potential. And in this programming, if we could say, it is we are designed to become something. And if we take the example of nature, for a daisy to become the best version of themselves, they need to have the right conditions to express their potential. So for the daisy, it's a right amount of warmth, of water, of sunlight. And if all the conditions are right, then the expression of what it's supposed to be or what it's meant to be can happen. I like when you said also that then it doesn't only become the best version of itself for its own sake or for survival, but also when it's the best version of itself, it contributes to
Absolutely.
the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So this idea that the whole world is seen in a perspective where there are interdependencies. It's never, nothing is in isolation. And when you ask what are we doing in education, Montessori explains very clearly that for her, what she has been doing, and that's because she doesn't come from education, she comes from the scientific world. Her goal was to create the conditions so that she could see the expression of the human potential, so that she could actually discover from, like emerging from the child, if we give the right conditions, what we're supposed to be. That's the perspective of the connection maybe between the idea of Montessori education and the world perspective of Montessori.
I think it's just also interesting that we think of the mainstream systems of education that seem to break learning into its pieces, as opposed to holistic education, bringing the learner, bringing the student, bringing the child, and seeing them as whole. And I think that's what we do in our program. And I'm so fortunate to have my partner in kind here. Because that's the conversation we have. She's Ruendo Lutz, and she heads she's program lead for the Diploma in Sustainable Development. And I think that's what the conversations we have over cups of coffee, is trying to ascertain how do we bring this wholeness into the spaces of learning, teaching. And it's not always difficult within a system that's predicated on the scientific or reductionist method, and then trying to create spaces, and we kind of find our way in some way. And that's by working with the Ubuntu pedagogy, of bringing Ubuntu into the spaces that we work in. And you can't pinpoint Ubuntu and say this is it. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Ubuntu, it's part of an African philosophy or part of the African cosmology. And in the Nguni languages, which is isiZulu, isiXhosa, and Ndebele, it translates into Umuntu nomuntu gabantu. I am because of you. I am because of others or humanity. And how we bring that in is just a form of respect. How do we break those barriers between calling me... I asked them to call me Mr. because I'm old enough to be their fathers. But if they want to call me Shaun, they can, right? But it's also noticing a student not performing in class. What is going on? Asking those questions. Now, in the mainstream system, 55-minute lecture, 300 students in the class. Generally, a lecturer doesn't have a chance to do that. And so sometimes we find in our class, Ruendo would have someone talking to someone, and a student breaking down and crying doesn't have time always to be able to do that or the space to do that. And so we kind of go beyond that, and we do stuff outside of the classroom as well. And I don't want to digress from this, but Ubuntu is what grounds us. Ubuntu is that part of us that recognizes I am part of the collective, I am part of the community. And within that system, you can never be alone. You can never be individualistic, because my expression of who I am comes from the collective. And it's always as if together we are better. Individually, you cannot do it. And so, I mean, we can talk further about that, and maybe I'll hand back to you, lest I go on about it.
There is a very interesting play that takes several different words when we think about all these, and it's always this. On one side, we talk in education about independence, but at the same time, we talk about the importance of interdependence. And for many who are not familiar with Montessori, these two sounds conflicting. Where actually, if you think about how nature works, a daisy can contribute to the ecosystem only if it has developed their own capacity. In a similar way, in society, interdependency, the fact that we exist because of others is possible because each of us have developed some level of independence. So the importance of independence and is not it's not in opposition. It's actually necessary. The independence is a necessity for the possibility of interdependency. And it resonates also with the idea of the cosmos or Ubuntu. Correct me if I'm wrong. With this idea that in the cosmos, nothing exists in isolation, but every she calls this cosmic agent, or every living species or individual has something to accomplish individually, so that the community, the system works. So this interplay of the individual in the group, the individual in the community.
I know we were talking earlier, and you spoke about this force or this energy. Maybe you want to say something a bit more about that, yeah?
Yes. So Montessori borrowed that from Percy Nunn, the word horme, Horme. It's this idea of a life force. In French, he used the élan vital. So it's something about like the drive of life. And most of the time when she talks about it in the context of human development. That when the baby comes in the world, we don't have to ask the baby to be interested in language. It's in them. And not only they are directed towards language, that would be more sensitivity or even a human tendency, because not only when they're young, but there is an energy. We could even, sometimes she refers it to as love. The love for what's outside of them, the love for the environment, love for others, etc. And so that's when the baby is, when you're talking to the baby and the baby is looking at your lips and concentrating in an absolutely mind-blowing way, a concentration we don't find anywhere later in life, right? The baby is the most powerful person to be concentrated. And that horme, that energy of life, of love, expresses itself in human development, but also that's what any form of life, that's the difference between I am a phytoplankton as a sum of molecules, or I am doing something here, I am active. So she also used the word philosophy of movement, where that's where it goes from something that doesn't do anything, no action, no movement, to actually accomplishing something for the system, whether even non-living, like the air is following the laws of physics and the laws of chemistry, etc., so that it accomplishes what it has to do. And we're all very grateful it does, because without it we wouldn't have cycle of water, we wouldn't have all the things that make life possible. So this idea of horme being this fundamental force behind everything. But you talk about something similar in...
Yeah. I remember saying there's some research done by Kagame, interestingly Kagame like Paul Kagame, in Rwanda and in Kenya and Rwanda, as well as within some of the Bantu languages, the suffix, if you think of Ubuntu, the NTU, the Ntu, he says that Ntu is a force. It's a force. It's a force that comes from everything and gives expression to plants, gives expression to laughter, and there's different classifications he's identified for. I won't go into those four. But that aspect of force, so it's not what in traditional religions or so we'll call God. I think it's God as an expression, kind of expresses God's self through that force, and that force brings the awakening. So he speaks of, for example, to know it will be in a thing, and a thing could be laughter, beauty. So beauty on itself, you can't tell someone about beauty, but it's that feeling, it's that experience of it, and that's that ntu. And I think we sometimes are unconscious of its existence in our lives, but in the human form of that expression, it comes through Ubuntu, via Abantu, via people, and. I see Muli. I'm gonna call her in there because I'm curious. One of my other friends, she comes from the Venda tradition, which I will. Yes, we're making this interactive. So maybe I can ask Muli. So Muli, your experience of Ubuntu in the Venda culture, Venda culture, how is that? Do you have the concept of Ubuntu, Abantu? I'm putting on the spot.
Oh my goodness! I cannot believe how Yes, so my name is Nguyen. I grew up in Limpopo. So Ubuntu is a very strong concept. We live it, and I think we still do. We're very lucky that we still do, some parts for sure. So with us, there is a very strong drive around community. So when they say it takes a community to raise a child, we've experienced that. In Limpopo, for example, I'll give a very practical, these young people here we know. So if you are a young person and let's say you are drinking, smoking outside, anyone can reprimand you. And it's that concept of like, we cannot watch young people or children go the other direction while you can act as a parent at that moment. So there's no that they will wait to come and tell to your parents. It will be right on the spot. So, and in a way, it has really kept young people from a lot of like bad stuff that are currently happening right now. And growing up here, I fear a lot of having children that are growing in the city because there is no that. When you are off side of your child, you're off side of your child. But in Limpopo, whether you're off side, there are people that are there and they're parenting with you. And there's a lot of like different concepts. I know there's a community that they still, for example, work with police. So in a case where maybe a young person steals something, it goes through the police and then they take it to the Royal Council. And in the Royal Council, they have a capacity to really get into the problem. And often you find that maybe this young person doesn't have school shoes. There's no male figure in that household. They identify somebody that could play that male figure in that household. And by that, we've saved a child. But the system currently, a boy will go into juvenile. And that's it. And recovery from that, it's so unlikely.
So, thank you. Thank you so much. I think we, and that brings us to the conversation we were having earlier about community, because likewise, having growing up in a township in Durban, I've had a similar experience where I was the child of the neighbor. By the time my mom came home, if I misbehaved, my mom got the news first and would thank the neighbor for delivering the sad news, bringing disrespect to the family, and then I would have some stripes on my legs the next morning as evidence that I was disciplined. Right or wrong, there's another story. But I think this aspect of community, which maybe you could expound on, because when Muli talks about community, I talk about community, we don't sometimes see the school as part of community. The school is sometimes dislodged, or there's a dislocation between the educational institution on the one hand and then the community where we resided. And I think you had another take earlier, we had a convo.
It was quite interesting. The way it came is that I was talking about how the importance of the community to support the growth of the child. And he looked at me and said something like, "Are you talking about the school or the community?" And that made me realize, I never realized that for me there is no difference.
Yeah.
That when you think about a very basic concept in Montessori is the idea of the prepared environment. it's quite basic. Again, think about the fact that she was a scientist, and she understands that a subject is influenced by its environment. And the environment is not, again, it's connected, it's interdependent. It's not school on one side and family on the other side. She understands that the environment of the child is everything that is around the child. So when she talks about the adult, she talks about the adult, not specifically only the teacher or only the parent. So when she talks about how we can help by preparing the environment, is the whole environment of the child. How can we as a community of adults prepare the environment of the child so that they have what we were talking about earlier, the best conditions for them to express their human potential. So it breaks the idea of there is school on one side and there is the community on the other side. It brings also a lot of work in terms of education, because that means you cannot be a teacher, a guide, a person working in a school. Let's use teacher today. You cannot be a teacher and believe that your work is what's happening in the classroom. Because if you consider that, then that means you're already starting this isolation for the child, where the child is not going to see the world as something connected, something interdependent. They're already starting to see there is school on one side and there is my community on the other side. In South Africa, the one of the work we have to do as a Montessori community, and we have to do that everywhere in the world, is to ensure that what we offer in the classrooms aren't imported education. And I believe that I've been working in different places, very contrasted places, Europe, North America, Panama, and Tanzania, and now here. And I've been able to witness the beauty of the fact that most of what we offer normally in Montessori is very universal. It really speaks to everybody. But only if the adult understands the importance of making it connected with the community. If I take an example of the younger child in the children's house from 3 to 6 years old, there are some things that are materialized abstraction in mathematics, for example. This doesn't need to be culturally appropriate because it's a pure abstraction of mathematics represented in an object. But if you think about practical life, for example, the whole idea of practical life is for the child to connect with their culture, connect with their everyday life. So if you take one activity that makes a lot of sense in North America, which would be, let's say, polishing shoes. That's something that's in the tradition of Montessori, polishing shoes. And you bring that to India. For example, in India, I discovered that one very important activity is washing my feet. And that is a practical life activity. If you show that in the US, the children are going to feel very disconnected from that activity. So it is universal in the principles, but then it's very important that the adult that does Montessori understands what part of it is universal and what part of it needs to be connected with the reality, the culture, the identity of that place and that the child and the community, which makes it challenging in elementary. Because primary, 6 to 12, at this age, the child comes to another stage of development. Before that, they are in what Montessori calls the absorbent mind. So their job, their developmental task between 0 and 5, 6 years old around, is to take in everything. And that's the beauty of it is now we know why in terms of like the brain. It's basically all of their experiences are creating connections, are literally building the brain. They are building the brain through what they see and experience of the world. So during these first years, they take in. So if you think about, I had some example, grace and courtesy. From 0 to 6, they are listening and we are showing them how to behave, how to transport a chair, how to open the door for someone, how to offer tea. I love that. When I go observe in a Montessori school, I'm always being offered some tea by children. So that's from 0 to 5, 6 years old. But then in the second plane, they get in the reasoning mind, so they're gonna want to know why. Why am I offering tea here? And they're gonna be interested in using their imagination, etc. So in terms of cultural identity, it means that in the work we do in elementary, we also have to expand all of the cultural aspects. For example, we have in each subject stories. There are the great stories, maybe you have heard of them. The great stories are the origin stories of the big subjects. The origin story of geography. We start with the Big Bang. Everything where it comes from all the way to formation of the planet's crust. We have the origin story of life that's introduced to biology. We talk about evolution, but how life came to be. There is always a strong influence of this interdependent perspective in all of these stories. And then the story of the coming of humans, where it's about, we had this story of the evolution of all the life, and this at the very end we have this red line, and that's where all the human beings have been. But who are we? So we start this story with really about what is special about human beings, and what is special about it is something we're going to talk about that, by the way, later, is they have a brain to think and imagine, they have hands to work and create, and they have a heart to love. And this triad here is so important in so many ways. But there are these stories. And then when we get to after that, we have so many stories that are here to bring context to the child in understanding where they are, who they are, and what is their culture. There are some stories that we can all share, or most of us. The story of the alphabet, for example. Not everybody, but a lot of culture in the world. The story of the numbers is fascinating. But there is also the story of the language. And what I've discovered in Tanzania is that, and I would love to have your perspective from South Africa, is that the local languages, the real languages from the place, are undervalued at a level that even the people value more English or Swahili than their own language. And so one of the work that's so important in education is making sure that when we train teachers, we offer them the story of Isigi Xhosa. Did I do that correctly? The story of Zulu, the story of, and making sure who are the children in my classroom? What are their true origins? What language are being talked at home? And making sure that we offer the teachers the stories for every single of these languages. Because our mother tongue is much more than just a way of communicating.
Absolutely.
It's like part of our identity, way of thinking even.
Yeah. I think you touched on something there, and I just want to go back. I mean, we have 12 official languages in South Africa, but I want to return to, because it links to using language to your creation story. And when you talk about the story, many stories, As part of a word thrown around in academic spaces, the whole aspect of decoloniality, decolonizing the knowledges that we have been embedded or have been predicated on how we learn. So the way I learn about history, the way I learn about geography, it's always the lion that glorifies the hunt. So in this case, it's something that's come from generally the global north. It's been put into our curriculums, and even if you're teaching isiXhosa or isiZulu, it's the same story that's being told, but just using language. So my question then would be, within the Montessori system or paradigm or learning, how is there space for those stories that are not where geography comes from, where history comes from, which is known in the global north? Is there now exploration to find out within Africa, within the 55 countries, including Western Sahara, what are those cosmologicals, what are those stories of a region, and how are those sought to be brought into the spaces for children?
That's a very important question. So the way, here I'm going to talk about cosmic education, which is for the elementary age child, because before that, from 3 to 6, we're working on another level. We're creating, helping the child. We're not creating anything. We're helping the child creating a foundation of intelligence on reality through experiences and connection. But coming to elementary, because of this very strong necessity for them to understand, to get the why and the how, because of that, we are entering in a world where we have to offer everything, the whole universe. And the way Montessori says that is that they are interested in everything, the whole universe, so we have to offer everything. But she says, but no adults can do that. No human being can know about everything, right? And she also says, and it's also dangerous to decide as an adult what is everything, because that means we bring our own biases and prejudices. So the idea, and obviously it's not perfect, everything is evolving and getting better with time, but the idea is that we offer keys of understanding that allows the child to make their own exploration with it. That's a very general thing. So if I zoom in the idea of history, there are two important aspects that help us bring history in a fundamentally different way than in traditional education. First of all, history begins with understanding what is universal about being a human being. It starts with the fundamental needs. That's the very first thing that connects with history. In a Montessori course, the very first thing we do in history is the fundamental needs. And we start with the child, of course. So we have a chart that shows the spiritual and the material fundamental needs. Spiritual meaning the needs for culture, beauty, all these things that are the Ubuntu ones. And then the material ones, food, clothing, defense, transportation, etc. And we start with the experience of the child. So the first presentation is about, okay, so what did you do when you wake up? You woke up this morning. How did you come to school? What did you eat, etc. And then we play with it. And then we will reuse this idea of fundamental needs later when we study civilization or cultures. Saying, okay, so any culture, how do they satisfy their spiritual needs? How do they satisfy their material needs, food, etc.? So basically, that's one thing that we do is we offer, instead of showing, emphasizing differences and limits and barriers between the people, we do quite the opposite. We actually study how we are all human beings. So that's on the fundamental needs. And on the other side is throughout time, so history, instead of focusing on what separates us, the kings, the queens, the conflicts, the frontiers, etc. Instead of focusing on that, we focus on the expression of what it means to be human throughout time. For example, we have a material that is about, it's called the history cards. It's basically we take one of the fundamental needs and we show how this evolved throughout time. So we show how the human tendency of exploration, of imagination, of connection, language, etc., how these human characteristics allowed humanity to evolve, whether it's technologically or in terms of techniques or etc. So again, long time before we start talking about countries and borders, etc., long time before that, we look at what it means to be human and how this shows throughout history. Personally, when I did my training, it really changed my own perspective on the world, because when I'm traveling today, now that I have this training and worked a lot with children, when I'm traveling and I discovered something that maybe would feel weird, like, that's different. Then before I would have been like, difference, you know? Yeah. But now I'm like, that's how they satisfy this fundamental needs. And how was that invented? Sure. And where does that come from? So my whole personal perspective on diversity is very different. Even the word diversity in the past for me was about looking at different people. Yeah. Like, if you type diversity on Google. And now when I think about diversity, that's not what I see. I see the creativity in humanity. Like how all the different ways we can be human.
That sounds so interesting, because I'm thinking there's an element of awe. And nature has that awe, that beauty, that wonder. You also touched on something, and maybe just a little explanation further, or drawing from some practical example. You spoke about the creating best experiences for bringing out human potential. And I think of our program, how we strive to do that by, for example, not using traditional assessments with writing tests and memorizing stuff, but it's the application and hopefully the imbibing of that knowledge, the embodiment of that knowledge, so that when our students leave, they're able to learn, to have some skill set that there's a sense of I can once they move through the program. So, and I think of us as just as adults, maybe not within or not within education, and asking the question is what are we doing for ourselves to be in the situation or the pathway where our human potential is continuously expanded. And so the question then is, how are teachers in Montessori positioning themselves, or are there possibilities for themselves, for them to continuously find themselves in these best experiences where you're bringing out their human potential?
I love that question. Where to start? There is one thing that made me smile and made me very happy when I went online and tried to read things from you or about you, etc. Just to see, like, where are we going to be able to connect? And actually everywhere, that was the conclusion. But one thing that I was very excited is there was one place where I think it was talking about your whole person program or something. And you were talking about how you work with the head, the heart, and the hand. I was like, this is our story. Why I'm saying that is, I think, first of all, in the way we when we prepare ourselves to be teachers, we go through the training, and in the training we have also 3 aspects in the training. Montessori's words for it is the intellectual preparation, spiritual preparation, and scientific preparation. What it means is intellectual preparation is knowing about human development, characteristics of the child at every age, etc., knowing about mathematics, etc. The scientific is how. So technically skills. How do I make this happen in the classroom? How do I present the material? So in the training, the teachers have to repeat a lot the presentation. Sometimes they're like, I know it. I know you know it, but you don't do it. It's 2 different things. So it's like there is the head and the hand. The hands needs to happen. But then there is the third part, the spiritual preparation. And that is about a lot about the self-awareness, developing of the self-awareness. One thing that Montessori talks about is how we grew up in an environment where we have absorbed things from our communities around us without no ill intentions there. But we took the biases and the prejudices from people around us because that was our job. We were in our absorbent mind, and that's what we had to do. We had to take what Mario Montessori, that's Maria's son, calls the spiritual territory, the world of morality, the world of religion also. So the child is taking this and making it themselves. So we have that in ourselves. And when we work with children, if we are not aware of it, then we'll just continue the process and we're just giving further in the next generation all of these prejudices and biases. So it's about working on ourselves to raise that self-awareness so that we can't really solve it, or not completely, because it's very much part of ourselves. But if we're aware of it, every piece of awareness is a new possibility for choice. If I know this has an influence on me, I can keep myself on check and decide, am I going to act on it or not? Where in everyday life, we act a lot on these things without knowing, just because we don't even realize we are. So to come back to your question, I did a big tour. Montessori says in many places that the only way for us adults to learn and to grow is through working with children and observation of the child. That's why, sometimes people misuse that. When she says the child is the teacher, she doesn't mean the child is going to come and teach us.
Sure.
She means that through our observation of the child, first we can discover what it means to be human, because they are closer to their humanity. They're not yet entirely deviated, as she says. This is one way the child can teach us. But the other way is, when we work with children, we are discovering a lot of things about us.
Sure.
Because we're like, why did I do that? And if you are ready to do this work, then you have to go deep and think about, okay, so what is happening here? And this happens only if you are acting with the children. If you're just like me, like these last couple of weeks, I've been observing a lot of children because I was invited in so many schools, some of your schools. And I'm sitting down and looking at all these children. I can maybe learn intellectually, but because I'm not interacting with them, there is a part of the learning that doesn't happen. And so that's part of the answer. I think that part of the growth of an adult, especially in education, is through the work, the prepared work with children, because then we learn a lot from it.
Sure. I think I want to bring in a story, not a long story, but just an insight. So in May this year, I accompanied a wonderful friend and acquaintance who's doing work in KwaZulu-Natal, in, I think it's into Zuma. She's working with 18 schools, and they're transforming slowly into Montessori. And I love that because in my mind, I'm very ignorant about what Montessori does. And I thought it's very middle-class, bougie, you know. And so in a township setting, they're having this transition happening very slowly, but excitingly interesting to watch. And so for the first time, I think for the participants' first time, they were able to go to the mountains on a camp. They were able to hike. And it was wonderful to experience their sense of awe, fear, excitement, joy. There's that wholeness that kicked in. And I think for once, they were also able to get away from their children, for some of them. But this one mama said, she's a mama, she's probably in her 60s, and one of the most progressive she's like taking it. So she said, I've got this classroom, I've got this special room. I can't say my friend's name. Let's call her X. I've got X's room. And when X comes, I know it's ready. So I said to her, Mama, tell me what is happening with you and your family. And she said, oh, my dear, I'm telling you, my life is not the same since I've been involved in Montessori. It's changed my life. It's changed how I speak to my children. There's this change that has happened. And I think that's kind of, for me, a very interesting maybe contribution to what you're saying, is this sense of when we start to do our work, and I think this is in our program as well, we constantly have to dig deeper and go into our work. We come into a space where we try to create those experiences or those moments for students to come to this realization that they can and they have this possibility. And when that starts to happen, it doesn't feel strenuous. The responsibility somehow shifts from us, and we share the space where we have this co-creation, this collaboration. And I think it's tiring because when you do deep work, it's not easy to tick boxes. It's really challenging. And consistently, I think, and I think maybe a tip for those in the spaces is collaborate with others who are in a similar environment. Maybe a different environment also has its benefits too. But you're able to bounce off, learn. There's a kind of what Ruenda calls me her thinking partner. And besides being her other, her husband's name is Shaun as well. So Shaun is there. No, Shaun, my work, Shaun, not my home, Shaun. But it's that kind of thing of finding this, making these connections, to others, being able to help you to be able to think through stuff. And I think that's part of the work we have to do if we're working in the space in education. For we run the risk of being so blasé or laissez-faire in the way we do stuff that it's no longer education, but it's more just chunking information and dropping information into people.
Yeah. I believe that's also why in Montessori we that's why I was hesitant to use the word teaching and teacher. Montessori were so annoying because we're always saying like, well, this word is maybe not the best word for that, because teaching has this idea that we know and we give.
Yeah.
So there is this passivity on the child's side in the word teaching and teacher. But I mean, Montessori herself used the word teacher because we need to use words at some point. And so this idea that, the word, okay, I'm going to go there. The word integration is used a little bit in all directions today. But I think it's a good word to bring back a lot of things that we discussed today. For example, the idea that the world, the cosmos is not just a sum of things living and non-living, but it's something that works together. There is a system. We talk about system thinking, and if you think about integration, also in the child, in the human being, in the child in development, she talks about the integration of human personality as saying that a human personality cannot be isolated, the head, the hand, and the heart. And she says that in the 3 to 6, in the first plane, it's so fundamental that the children are offered every single day a lot of opportunities to integrate their personality by doing activities that plays with all the three of them. Meaning, it's activity that has that is calling to their intelligence, but an activity that is in movement and action, but also activity that they choose, that they use the power of the will, they develop the power of the will. And that's why it's so important that she talks about this, and that's what she talks about, the integration of the human personality. She sometimes talks about the separation of the body and the mind, where in traditional school we ask them to sit down and not move and not talk and just receive. So we are just in the mind.
Yeah.
We're expecting them to learn without the body. And so this idea of integration also in the community, where we cannot expect the education to be something that's done only at home or only at school, or even in both places but separately. Like for the child to have an integrated personality, they need to feel, they need to see that there is a connection in between all of that. So why was I going there? There was a reason. Yeah. So this idea of integration and the work that that you do and that we do with this idea of having also with adults in the training, all of this working. So trying to design courses and trainings where the adults are not only playing on one of these planes, not only with their mind, just developing this understanding theoretical, but also working with their hands, playing with the materials and figuring out how to do that, but also working on their spiritual journey and offering them the key so that they can do this work by themselves.
I find that we do this. For example, we have a module on eco-literacy. And so we take students into the woodlands for 20 to 30 minutes to sit in the space and observe. And this starts in winter and will end now in spring. And this realization of wonder, of awe, of how nature comes alive is very, I think, very revolutionary in a sense. Because in order to inculcate the learning of head, heart, and hands, you've got to experience something rather than learning it just from the head space. And you speak very interestingly of integration, and I think that underlies what we do. From year 1 to year 3, there's the integration that happens. Nothing is in isolation. And so when working, I mean, it's our human system. Can you imagine just saying, this is my arm and this is it? But everything is integrated. But in our educational system, there's this